You got a minute to pick a story. Less than a minute.
Oh, these, I don't know. These look good.
Hmm?
They're all kind of short.
That's fine. 30 seconds. Hello, and welcome to the final part of today's Black Fae Day Draw-a-thon. This is just going to be a short little 2-hour story time. I'll just be kind of willing to chat with you guys. My husband is going to read some Irish folk tales. He's off camera because there's no more space over here. Oh, that was his hand. Do you want to wave again? Excuse me. And I'll just be coloring in the sketches from this morning, which was just kind of a character shuffle, warm-up sketch kind of thing. So I thought this would be a good way to end the evening, just to kind of chill. I've got my wine, I've got my pen, got my husband. I'm ready to go. So hope you guys enjoyed my Black Fae Day stream. If you caught that, if not, the videos are up on my YouTube channel, Tiny Artist TV. And of course, I'm pretty sure you can see the little caption over here. It's telling you where you can find all of my notifications and social media information. Tiny Artist 516. That is at Twitter and at Facebook. I post more on Twitter than Facebook, but let's go ahead and get started. It is 8 o'clock. We're going to be going from 8 to 10. Maybe 8 to 9, seeing how we feel. We are adults, we might get tired, but we'll see. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
All
You got one picked out?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is coming from a treasury of Irish fairy and folk tales, which is a collection that was published by Barnes & Noble, and I bought it about sometime during the pandemic.
Yeah, it was like right before we moved into the house, about a month or so. So you've had it for only a couple of months. It was a Christmas present to yourself, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been enjoying it as a slow read, just every now and then picking it up and reading a story and getting a bit more insight into fairy lore and Irish folk tales.
And your heritage, since you're all of that Western area, Western European, and French and Irish.
Mm-hmm. So the tale I'm going to read y'all is the next one on my list. It's where my bookmark is. The Legend of, and apologies for all the pronunciation errors that are about to happen.
Yeah, Gaelic is not his first language, so...
Knockgrafton.
Oh!
The Legend of Knockgrafton. Translated by T. Crofton Croker. There once was a poor man who lived in the fertile glen of Asherlow, at the foot of the gloomy Galtee Mountains, and he had a great hump on his back. He looked just as if his body had been rolled up and placed upon his shoulders, and his head was pressed down with the weight so much that his chin, which he, when he was sitting, used to rest upon his knees for support. The country people were rather shy of meeting him in any lonesome place, for though, poor creature, he was as harmless and as inoffensive as a newborn infant, yet his deformity was so great that he scarcely appeared to be a human creature, and some ill-minded persons had set strange stories about him afoot. He was said to have a great knowledge of herbs and charms, but certain it was that he had a mighty skillful hand in planting straws and rushes into hats and baskets, which was the way he made his livelihood. Lushmore, for that was the nickname put upon him by reasons of his always wearing a sprig in the fairy cap, or Lushmore the foxglove in his little straw hat, which ever gave a higher penny for his plated work than any one else. And perhaps that was the reason why someone, out of envy, had circulated the strange stories about him. Be that as it may, it happened that he was returning one evening from the pretty town of Kahir towards Kapag, and as little Lushmore walked very slowly on account of the great hump on his back, it was quite dark when he came to the old moat of Knockfigton, which stood on the right side of his road. Tired and weary was he, and now no ways comfortable in his own mind that at thinking how much farther he had to travel, and that he should be walking all the night. So he sat down under the moat to rest himself, and began looking mournfully enough upon the moon, which, rising in clouded majesty at length, apparent queen, unveiled her peerless light, and o'er the dark her silver mantle threw. Presently there arose a wild strain of unearthly melody upon the ear of little Lushmore. He listened, and he thought that he had never heard such ravishing music before. It was like the sound of many voices, each mingling and blending with the other so strangely that he seemed to be one, though all singing different strains, and the words of the song were these: Da Luan, da Mort, da Luan, da Mort, da Luan, da Mort. When there would be a moment's pause, and then the round of melody went on again. Lushmore listened attentively, scarcely drawing his breath lest he might lose the slightest note. He now plainly perceived that the singing was within the moat, and though at first it had charmed him so much, he began to get tired of hearing the same rounds sung over and over so often without any change. So, availing himself of the pause when Da Luan da Mort had been sung 3 times, he took up the tune and raised it with the words Agus da der din, and then went on singing with the voices inside the moat, Da Luan da Mort, finishing the melody when the pause again came with Agus da der din. The fairies within Knockgrafton, for the song was a fairy melody, when they heard this addition to the tune, were so much delighted that, with instant resolve, it was determined to bring the mortal among them, whose musical skill so far exceeded theirs, and little Lushmore was conveyed into their company with the eddying speed of a whirlwind. Glorious to behold was the sight that burst upon him as he came down through the moat, twirling round and round with the lightness of a straw to the sweetest music that kept time to his motion. The greatest honor was then paid to him, for he was put above all the musicians, and he had servants tending upon him, and everything to his heart's content, and a hearty welcome to all. And in short, he was made as much as if he had been the first man in the land. Presently, Lushmore saw a great consultation going forward among the fairies, and notwithstanding all their civility, he felt very much frightened, until one stepping out from the rest came up to him and said, Lushmore, Lushmore, doubt not nor deplore, for the hump which you bore on your back is no more. Look down on the floor and view it, Lushmore. When the words were said, poor Lushmore felt himself so light and so happy that he thought he could have bounded at one jump over the moon like the cow in the history of the cat and the fiddle, and he saw, with inexpressible pleasure, his hump tremble down upon the ground from his shoulders. He then tried to lift up his head, and he did so with becoming caution, fearing that he might knock it against the ceiling of the grand hall where he was. He looked around and round again with the greatest wonder and delight upon everything, which appeared more and more beautiful. And overpowered at beholding such a resplendent scene, his head grew dizzy and his eyesight grew dim. At last he fell into a sound sleep, and when he woke, he found that it was broad daylight, the sun shining brightly and the birds singing sweetly, and that he was lying just at the foot of the moat of Knockgrafton, with the cows and sheep grazing peaceably round about him. The first thing Lushmore did after saying his prayers was to put his hand behind the feel for his hump, but no sign of one was there on his back. And he looked at himself with great pride, for he had now become a well-shaped, dapper little fellow, and more than that, found himself in full suit of new clothes, which he concluded the fairies had made for him. Towards Kapa he went, stepping out as lightly and springing up at every step as if he had been all his life a dancing master. Not a creature who met Lushmore knew him without his hump, and he had a great work to persuade everyone that he was the same man. In truth, he was not, so far as the outward appearance went. Of course, it was not long before the story of Lushmore's hump got about, and great wonder was made of it. Through the country, for miles around, it was the talk of everyone, high and low. One morning, as Lushmore was sitting contented enough at his cabin door, up came an old woman to him and asked him if he could direct her to Kapa. I need give you no directions, my good woman, said Lushmore, for this is Kapa, and whom may you want here? I have come, said the woman, out of the diocese country in the country of Waterford, looking after one Lushmore, who, I have heard tell, had his hump taken off by the fairies. For there is a son of a gossip of mine who has got a hump on him that will be his death, and maybe, if he could use the same charm as Lushmore, the hump may be taken off him. And now I have told you the reason of my coming so far. 'Tis to find out about his charm, if I can. Lushmore, who was ever a good-natured little fellow, told the woman all the particulars, how he had raised the tune for the fairies at Knockgrafton, how his hump had been removed off his shoulders, and how he had got a new suit of clothes into the bargain. The woman thanked him very much, and then went away quite happy and easy in her own mind. When she came back to her gossip's house in the country of Waterford, she told her everything that Lushmore had said, and they put the little humpbacked man, who was a peevish and cunning creature, from his birth upon a car and took him all the way across the country. It was a long journey, but they did not care for that, so the hump was taken from off him, and they brought him just at nightfall and left him under the old moat at Knockgrafton. Jack Madden, for that was the humpy man's name, had not been sitting there long when he heard the tune going on within the moat, much sweeter than before, for the fairies were singing it the way Lushmore had settled their music for them, and the song was going on. Da luan, da mort, da luan, da mort, da luan, da mort, August da Derdin, within every stopping. Jack Madden, who was in a great hurry to get quit of his hump, never thought of waiting until the fairies had done, or waiting for a fit opportunity to raise the tune higher again than Lushmore had. So having heard them sing it over 7 times without stopping, out he bawls, never minding the time of the humor of the tune, or how he could bring his words in properly, August da Derdin, August da Henna, thinking that if one day was good, 2 were better, and that if Lushmore had one new suit of clothes given him, he should have 2. No sooner had the words passed his lips that he was taken up and whisked into the moat with prodigious force, and the fairies came crowding round him with a great anger, screeching and screaming and roaring out, "Who spoiled our tune? Who spoiled our tune?" and one stepped up to him above all the rest and said, Jack Madden, your words come so bad in. The tomb we felt glad in, this castle you're had in, that your life may sadden. Here's 2 humps for Jack Madden. And 20 of the strongest fairies brought Lushmore's hump and put it down upon poor Jack's back over his own, where it became fixed as firmly as if it was nailed on with 12 penny nails by the best carpenter that ever drove one. Out of their castle they then kicked him, and in the morning, when Jack Madden's mother and her gossip came to look after their little man, they found him half dead, laying at the foot of the moat with the other hump on his back. Well, to be sure, how they did look at each other, but they were afraid to say anything, lest a hump might be put upon their own shoulders. Home they brought the unlucky Jack Madden with them, as downcast in their hearts, and their looks as ever to gossips were, and what through the weight of his other hump and the long journey, he died soon after leaving, they say, his heavy curse to anyone who would go to listen to fairy tunes again. It's funny.
Now, you said that was next on your list, but is that just another translation of the last story you told me you read?
Yes, the previous one was The Palace in the Roth, translated by Patrick Kennedy.
It's the exact same story.
Same story beats, but slightly different setting. And
but if you translate the lyrics, it's the days of the week, just like in the other story.
Yeah. In the first one, it's Ye Luan Ye Morth, Augusta, and then Augusta He Yen. And this translation, the earlier translation, they do translate it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday too. So they are. It seems that these are the same story, but passed down in slight differences that came from being passed down by different people.
Okay.
And they decided to put them together, which I really appreciate.
Does it say what region the translations came from?
No.
Okay. Just the who translated it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in the Palace in the Roth, it takes instead of a moat, it is a Roth, a small circular meadow surrounded by a mound of overgrown fuse bushes, the remnants of an earthen fort of one of the small chiefs of old days between Tombrook and Mufrin.
Baby Dora on the bed. What?
Also, I do like the inclusion of the poetic response from the leader of the musicians, or the leader of the fairies, to in the legend of Knockfordton.
Listen, I'm the one drinking, but you're tripping over your words. What's going on over there, BB?
Can't talk.
No. Oh no.
Let's see. Next one is a very short one.
They're all short.
This one's super short.
Okay. I did explain earlier about the stories, how some of them are kind of more like a collection of short tales more than like full bedtime stories that you might expect.
This really is a collection of what has been found and what is available as far as the poetic Edda.
Yeah, well, also the fact that like a lot of this was passed down through oral tradition and people's memories are limited, so the stories are shorter.
Yeah. Anyone interested in this, I would recommend the podcast Lore. I've been binge listening to it during work.
By Andrew Mankey. Yeah. Aaron Mankey. Why do I keep wanting to call him Andrew? It's Aaron Mankey.
Aaron Mankey.
He actually has a couple of different podcasts. So Lore is his main one, but he also has Cabinet of Curiosities, which are 15-minute episodes, whereas Lore is more 30 to sometimes closer to an hour. He also has a series on Amazon based off of his podcast series, but it basically delves into the history of monsters and how most of those monsters come from real life people doing horrific things.
The doppelganger episode is one that I found very. It really delves into the horror of how legends are used to excuse horrible things people do. The fact that the story of the man whose wife, her personality, I say in quotation, like suddenly changed, and the man, the husband, was basically, she wanted to leave him, and he became convinced that she was actually been replaced with a doppelganger, and with the witnessing of his fellow villagers, conducted horrible things to her because he was convinced that she was a doppelganger, and everyone else wasn't sure what to do in the situation. She ended up dying, and actually it was the local priest, when he finally visited and heard the story, was not convinced and got him charged for his crimes.
I must have missed that one. I've listened to, according to my Spotify rewind, over 200 hours of Lore. Maybe that one's just kind of in the background.
It's one of the earlier episodes.
Okay, yeah. So it's been a while since I've listened to that particular one.
My favorites are where there's been a couple of them where basically English settler comes to America, ignores the advice of the locals when they warn them, don't settle here, and they inevitably do, and bad things start happening. And I love when Andrew Mankey, he's like Aaron Mankey. It's Aaron Mankey.
It is Aaron.
Aaron Mankey. Even though he's very much like, there should be an explanation, but he's very willing to accept that when there isn't an explanation and leave the ambiguity there. And he does a lot of the end of the episode, will leave this little note of evidence that leaves the text open to interpretation.
Like, especially his episodes about ghost lights in certain places. Like, how do you disprove that? Because I mean, like, for most people, perception is reality. So if you see ghost lights in a place that's known to have experienced a lot of traumatic human history,
he does have this vein of like traumatic events can seem to leave a stain that lasts over time. But yet it's like he's trying to hold to, in his research, he's trying to hold to a rational view of the world, and yet in approaching the research he's gathered, he's left questioning, what is this evidence telling me? And I especially like the one where I'm trying to remember the details, but it was the hikers going up a snowy hilltop.
Oh yeah. And that case that was recently busted wide open on Twitter. Like that was fun.
Yeah.
You guys are wild.
it brings back in the end the name of the mountain that they're trying to go up on just a fun weekend is in the by the native tribe is basically don't go there and or Death Mountain basically, and the name itself is a warning, don't go there. And they went there and this mysterious attack happened. Latest one I listened to was the episode talking about how people who just disappear in the woods.
Oh, they're kind of like spirited away.
Yeah. And
which spirited away is a Eastern term, but ghosted away is kind of a more like, I guess, universal thing where people will literally just seem to vanish off the face of the earth.
Mm-hmm. Like one particular area was focused on was sights of a large creature and people disappearing regularly in the area, and even dogs who were used to try to track the people who'd recently just been taken would always lead to, a couple of them led to like the same area, and then the scent would just end. And no explanation.
That's almost as creepy as like, so I don't know if this is actually true or not. Like, it keeps coming up on creepypasta search and rescue things, but the staircases in the middle of the woods.
Oh yeah.
What is that? Like, is it just a creepypasta that's like been, made up to circulate, or like is there actually like have people been seeing these staircases in the middle of the woods?
Mm-hmm. That I don't know.
Because it's definitely like a very popular story amongst creepy storytime YouTubers and podcasts and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like it's like in my brain, it's like the way I think about it, it's like rendering errors to us. Like the closer you are to society, the more normal things are. And maybe it's the fact that what is strange, like we don't notice the strange things that happen because we're surrounded by so much normality. And yet the further and further away you get from society, the more like rendering errors occur and these creepy things start happening, and we have no explanation for them.
But like, what dictates the limits of society? Because that's when you get into the uncanny valley. Like, we just watched that video on homunculus.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like in within society, it's sorry, I'm buffering for a second. Okay, so you've got like on the edges of society, when you're surrounded by woods like we are, like we got 8 miles. So behind our house is just 8 miles of woods before you get to the next house.
And apparently we're on a peninsula. I think that's a very generous term. There's lakes around here, but anyway,
we're on a small strip of land that just happens to have 2 bridges on either side.
That is true though.
Yeah.
Oh.
Like we're still within our city. We're just kind of like
we have to cross a bridge to get into the city.
Yeah.
Either way.
Yeah. We're not like far away from civilization. We're just kind of like right on this little nook that's like right on the edge.
I was gonna say, oh well, actually, if you go down Ghostin, no, Ghostin is just past the bridge. Dagnabbit.
Yeah, we're just like on this small strip of like in the middle of the forest on this small strip of land that's right next to larger neighborhoods. So we're kind of like on that bit of edge of civilization, but we're surrounded by civilization except for 8 miles that way. Um, and in the stories that came out of that kind of environment were always basically don't go in the woods because the woods is dangerous. And now we're so surrounded by civilization, it's the grim dark fantasy is all about the playing off the horror of being in the city. And it brings to mind the what series? Haven't read it, but it's very Jim Butcher's Wizard series.
Jim Butcher.
Gosh, I can't remember the name. Sci-Fi Channel did like one season of a series, and they apparently overspent their budget on special effects.
Oh gosh!
And it didn't get a high enough rating for them to work and get a second season. Anyways,
that's unfortunate.
Jim Butcher, he is one of the things that he uses real statistics of people's disappearances and murder cases in the United States. He uses real statistics, and a character in his book uses real statistics to explain that when looking at this, the numbers show a predatory relationship with normal humanity. And Jim Butcher himself, in the interview I listened to where I got this info, he said that he doesn't believe that's what the statistics are actually saying, but he still used it in the context of the world he was building off of the real world to show that there is danger that in the world there's some predatory relationship with humanity that humanity's not aware of.
I'm pretty sure they are aware of it because it's probably other humans, but go off.
Yeah. Like the real, like our world, it's serial killers are a thing. And
there is actually, I think it's, was it Netflix? There's a series, very recent series, where there was a serial killer who was only killing young women, and he pretty much gotten away with it for about 25 years. And someone just recently basically got him to open up and admit to like everything he'd been doing. It sounds a little dramatized, but have they caught the Zodiac Killer? He's still,
I don't know. Oh, that's Joy.
Yeah. Our manager is like big time into serial killer mysteries and history. Do you want to read another story as a palate cleanser?
Yeah.
So this took a very dark turn. Please.
Yeah. Is a lot of these stories they're folk tales that are kind of a lot of them deal with how do you deal with fairies, and generally fairies, even though they are tricksters, do like to mess with people, they have a sense of propriety. Like in this story, they're singing a song and leaving an opening for this guy who just fell asleep basically on their doorstep to fill in the gap. And he does it rightly. He decides, like, okay, this is the pause, this is the moment. I can fill this in with, play my part in the tune. And they celebrate that. It's like they want him to join in their song. But then you have this other guy who, instead of joining in the song, instead of taking all the opportunities given to him to join in the song, there wasn't a pause, but the story points out that he could have, there's other ways to musically build off of what was going on. He could have even just joined in. Instead, he just blurts out like Friday, Saturday, and they're like, basically, he was just a jerk about it. He was impatient, and their response was terrible. The fact that he gets 2 humps on his back, and then he
dies like the next day.
I wonder if they're implying that like the 2 gossips who were trying to take care of him were like, we're not dealing with this anymore. So yeah, a lot of fairies, a lot of these stories, the fairies are like, when they find a human who's willing to play along with the game and do it decently well, they get really rewarded. And the fairies are also willing to punish those, very much punish those who are just bad people. And even some, in one story where a guy had to carry a dead man to his grave. Basically, the fairies were taking him to a gravesite, and they found he was walking along drunk, and like, nope, you're taking him. You take him to his gravesite so he can rest in peace. And if you don't do it before sunrise, well, things are not going to go well for you. And it was a lesson for the guy, and he changed his ways, and he became a better person from it. So there are those the fairies interact with where they do do a harsh thing, but it's for the betterment of the person. And there are those who are just jerks, and they're like, okay, here's the harsh thing, and it's just to punish you. So,
what you got next? Another iteration of the same story.
Oh, a very short story.
Okay.
But a tiny story, you could say.
Oh no. He's making a reference to a song that I'd say used to listen to, but we started listening to it not that long ago. Anyway.
A Donegal Fair, translated by Letitina McLaughlinick. Mattentalk.
Any true Irish men and women watching this, on the off chance that you are watching this, please forgive him. He's trying.
It's a bad thing to displeasure the gentry. Sure enough, they can be unfriendly if they're angered. And they can be the very best guide neighbors if they are treated kindly. Hey, see what I was talking about? My mother's sister was her alone in the house one day. We a big pot of water boiling on the fire, and the wee folk fell down the chimney and slipped with his leg in the hot water. He let a terrible squeal out of him, and in a minute the house was full of wee creatures pulling him out of the pot and carrying him across the floor.
That sounds terrifying and adorable.
Did she scald you? My aunt heard them saying to him. Nah, it was myself. Scalded my ansel, quoth the wee fellow. Ah well, says they. If it was your ansel scalded yourself, we say nothing. But if she had scalded you, we'd have made her pay. That's a tiny story.
So, tiny mafia.
Tiny fairy mafia. Next is Lanty McLuskey's Fairy Boom. Translated by William Carleton. Lanty McLuskey had married a wife, and of course it was necessary to have a house in which to keep her. Now Lanty had taken a bit of a farm, about 6 acres, but as there was no house on it, he resolved to build one. And that it might be as comfortable as possible, he selected for the site of it one of those beautiful green circles that was supposed to be the playground of the fairies.
Oh
No,
no.
that's just not a good idea.
Oh no.
Latney was warned against this, but as he was a headstrong man and
An idiot.
not much given to fear, he said he would not change such a pleasant situation for his house to oblige all the fairies in Europe. He accordingly proceeded with the building, which he finished off very neatly, and as it is usual on these occasions to give one's neighbors and friends a housewarming, so, in compliance with this good and pleasant old custom, Latney, having brought home the wife in the course of the day, got a fiddler and a lot of whiskey, and gave those who had come to see him a dance in the evening. This was all very well, and the fun and the hilarity were proceeding briskly, when a noise was heard after night had set in, like a crushing and straining of ribs and rafters on the top of the house. The folks assembled all listened, and without doubt there was nothing heard but crushing and heaving and pushing and groaning and panting, as if 1,000 little men were engaged in pulling down the roof.
Oh.
Come, said a voice which spoke in a tone of command. Work hard. You know we must have Latney's house down before midnight.
Oh my goodness.
There was an unwelcome piece of intelligence to Latney, who, finding that his enemies were such as he could not cope with, walked out and addressed them as follows. Gentlemen, I humbly ask your pardon for building on any place belonging to you, but if you have the civility to let me alone this night, I'll begin to pull down the roof of the house tomorrow morning. This was followed by a noise like the clapping of 1,000 tiny little hands and a shout of
Clapping of 1,000 tiny cheeks. What?
little hands and a shout of Bravo, Lantry, built halfway between the two Withlethorns above the boreen. And after another hearty little shout of exultation, there was a brisk rushing noise, and they were heard no more. The story, however, does not end here, for Lantry, when digging the foundation of his new house, found the full of a cam, a metal vessel of gold.
Ooh.
So that in leaving to the fairies their playground, he became a richer man than ever he otherwise would have been had he never come in contact with them at all. Again, here we see, like, he ignores the warnings, and instead of coming out and shouting at them, he realizes the situation, and
it's like, oh, there actually is some credence to this.
Yeah, and he decides, like, talk with them, make a deal with them, like, I'll do the work. I'll take it down. Just let us alone so we can enjoy our party, as is custom. And they, in turn, like, give him advice. Hey, go build over here. Like, you bought the land, just let us have the spot. And I believe maybe there's a lot of what the fairy stories point to is having a way of teaching people how to live a bit in harmony with nature.
And how to respect the things that are there instead of just building over everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Don't it always seem to go, but you don't know what you got till it's gone. Paper dice, put up a parking lot. Ooh, bop, bop, bop.
Okay. The next is actually the next to last in this section. The next section being the cave fairies. Finally, almost to the end of the first section of the book.
Nice.
This one's a bit longer.
Okay.
Called Fairies or No Fairies.
Yeah.
Translated by T. Crofton Croker. John Mulligan was as fine an old fellow as ever threw a Carlo's spur into the sides of a horse. I have no idea what that phrase means.
Yeah, I don't know what a Carlo spur is, but okay. Go on. Continue.
But it seems like he's a nice guy. He was, besides, as jolly as a boon companion, ever a jug of punch as you would meet from Consor Point to bloody Farland. and a good horse he used to ride. I don't know. And a good horse he used to ride, and a stiffer jug of punch than his was not in 19 baronaries.
Okay, there's so much deep Irish folklore here. I'm lost, and I'm out of the two of us, I'm kind of the lorophile, if you will.
It seems like they're trying to make it clear he's a good guy, and so that's the best I got.
Okay.
I'm guessing punch means
Let me see.
fear. Yeah.
Let me see the tome. Look at this. Isn't that beautiful? Look at this. All right. Where are you?
This
Lady
side.
McCluskey's? No? Fairies or no fairies?
Yeah.
Let's see. Was a fine old fellow as ever threw a Carlo spur into the side of a horse. Besides a jolly boon companion over a jug of punch. Did you would meet from... Okay. Okay, so basically, he's good company, good to drink with, good to hang out with.
Yeah.
That particular string of words is just
so
very mouthful.
As an aside, I used to have a housemate who was Canadian.
Oh no!
And when he was moving out, he was getting ready to move out. I just heard him talking, and I could not understand the phrases he was using. And I looked at it and I said, "Are you speaking Canadian?" And he looked at me and laughed and said, "It's." Laughed and it's like, we have this thing where we would sarcastically say what probably is going through the other person's head. And he says, like, imitating what I'm probably thinking. It's like I understand what each of these words are on their own, but the way you're stringing them together makes zero sense.
Because for the year and a half, 2 years, how long did you live with Josh?
A year at least.
A year? Most of what they talked about was Kanye West.
This guy.
So there was no need to like bring up Canadian slang in their conversations.
I now have a deep appreciation for for Kanye, at least up to not the latest album, but I haven't listened to the latest album, but it was a big deal for Josh when Yeezy came out. No, Life of Pablo came out.
Could not get that boy to stop talking about. Yay!
Yeah. Yeah, that's a tangent. That's a
very long. Anyway, back to
okay.
The long roundabout Irish way of saying he's a jolly good fellow.
May he be stuck no more to it that he ought to have done, but that is nothing whatever to the story I'm going to tell.
Wow!
John believed devoutly in fairies, and an angry man was he if you doubted them. He had more fairy stories than would make, if properly printed, in a revolt of print running down a meadow of margin, too thick corrados for Mr. John Murray of my neighborhood.
We're being nosy. Our neighbors are doing things again. Carry on.
Quartos for Mr. John Murray of Alberline Street, all of which he used to tell on all occasions that he could find listeners. Many believed his stories. Many more did not believe them, but nobody in the process of time used to contradict the old gentleman, for it was a pity to vex him. But he had a couple of young neighbors who were just come down from their first vacation in Trinity College to spend the summer months with an uncle of theirs, Mr. Wiley, an old Cromwellian who lived at Ballybeg-Molinahon.
What?
You want to try that?
I do. Ballybeg-Molinahon.
Ballybeg-Molinahon. Okay.
Why did I say that with like an Indian accent though?
I don't know.
I have no Dizzy in me whatsoever.
And they were too full of logic to let the old man have his way undisputed. Every story he told was laughed at and said that it was impossible, that it was merely old woman's gabble, and other such things. When he would insist that all his stories were derived from the most credible sources, nay, that some of them had been told him by his own grandmother, a very respectable old lady, but slightly affected in her faculties as things had come under her own knowledge, they cut the matter short by declaring that she was in her dotage and at the best of times had a strong propensity to pulling a long bow. I don't know what that means.
Telling tales.
Oh, okay. But they...
Telling lies, Johnny.
Said they. John Mulligan, did you ever see a fairy yourself? Never, was the reply. Well then, they answered, until you do not be bothering us with any more tales of my grandmother. Jack was particularly nettled at this and took up the cudgels of his grandmother, but the youngsters were too sharp for him, and finally he got into a passion, as people generally do who have the worst of an argument. This evening it was their uncle's, an old crony of his with whom he had dined. He had taken a large portion of his unusual beverage and was quite riotous. He at last got up in a passion, ordered his horse, and in spite of his host's entreaties, galloped off, although he had intended to have slept there, declaring that he would not have any more to do with a pair of jack-gnat puppies who, because they had learned how to read good-for-nothing books in cramped writing and were taught by a parcel of wiggly, red-snouted, parting prigs, not, added he, however, that I say a man may not be a good man and have a red nose. They imagined they knew more than a man who has had buckle and tongue together facing the wind of the world for 5 years. He rode off in a fret and galloped as hard as his horse Shunbui could powder away over the limestone. Damn it, hiccup tea. Lord pardon me for swearing. The brats had me in one thing. I never did see a fairy, and I would give up 5 as good acres as ever grew apple potatoes to get a glimpse of one. And by the powers, what is that? Yes.
I'm just listening to your story.
Okay. He looked and saw a gallant spectacle. His road lay by a noble demesne, gracefully sprinkled with trees, not thickly planted as in a dark forest, but deposited now in clumps of 5 or 6, now standing singly, towering over the plain of verdure around them, as a beautiful promontory arising out of the sea. He had come right opposite the glory of the wood. It was an oak, which in the oldest title deeds of the country, and they were at least 500 years old, was called the Old Oak of Balsenhig.
For those of us just joining us, we're currently, well, not we, my assistant, my lovely assistant, who's off screen here, wave your hand, is currently reading Fairies or No Fairies. Synopsis. This is not a bedtime story for a child. No, it's not. They're Irish folktales. They're not meant for, well, modern day children, I
Is that
suppose.
Mom?
It is.
Hi, Mom.
Hi. Fairies or no fairies, in which there is a man who believes in fairies, and he's an older man, and the whole town laughs at him because of his belief in fairies. So we're about to find out what happens when.
Mainly, it's two youngsters who just came back from college and are refuting all of his stories because they're impossible. And they ask him, "Have you ever seen a fairy?" And he's like, "No." And now he's running off in a huff, and he's like, "You know what? They're right. I've never seen a fairy." And I believe he's about to meet a fairy.
Let's continue.
Old trees. The moon was shining on. It's bright. If I were a poet like Mr. Wordsworth, I should tell you how the beautiful light was broken into 1,000 different fragments, and how it filled the entire tree with a glorious flood, bathing every particular leaf, and showing forth every particular bough. But as I am not a poet, I shall go on with my story. By this light, Jack saw a brilliant company of lovely little forms dancing under the oak with an unsteady and rolling motion. The company was large. Some spread out far beyond the farthest boundary of the shadow of the oak's branches. Some were seen glancing through the flashes of light shining through the leaves. Some were barely visible, nestling under the trunks. Some, no doubt, were entirely concealed from his eyes. Never did man see anything more beautiful. They were not 3 inches in height, but they were white as the driven snow, and beyond number numberless. Jack threw his bridle over his horse's neck and drew up to a low wall which bounded the demesne, and leaning over it, surveyed with infinite delight their
Hold on. Do I need to turn the light on? This is going to get really bright. Just a second.
No, that's fine.
No. Oh, you took the bulb out.
It's there. It's just not working.
Oh!
Ah! Why'd you do this?
I didn't think it was going to, be that bright.
Okay.
Oh.
They're diversified gambols.
There.
By looking long at them, he soon saw objects which had not struck him at first. In particular, that in the middle was a chief of superior stature, round whom the ground appeared to move. He gazed so long that he was quite overcome with joy and could not help shouting out, "Bravo, little fellows," said he, "well kicked and strong." But the instant he uttered the words, the night was darkened and the fairies vanished with the speed of lightning. "I wish," said Jack, "I had held my tongue, but no matter now. I shall just turn the bridle about and go back to Ballybegmulenhon Castle, and beat the young Master Wiley's fine reasoners as they think themselves out of the field clean." No sooner said than done, and Jack was back again as if upon the wings of the wind. He rapped fiercely at the door and called aloud for the 2 collegians.
Wait a minute. That's not what that means.
"Hello," said he, "young flatcaps. Come down now if you dare. Come down if you dare, and I shall give you ocular demonstration of the truth of what I was saying." Old Wiley put his head out of the window and said, "Jack Mulligan, what brings you back so soon?" "The fairies!" shouted Jack. "The fairies!" "I am afraid," muttered the Lord of Ballybegmulenhon, "the last glass you took was too little watered. But no matter. Come in and cool yourself over a tumbler of punch." He came in and sat down again at table. In great spirits he told his story. How he had seen thousands and tens of thousands of fairies dancing about the old oak and Balsenhag. He described their beautiful dresses of shining silver, their flat-crowned hats glittering in the moonbeams, and the princely stature and demeanor of the central figure. He added that he heard them singing and playing the most enchanting music. But this was merely imagination. The young men laughed, but Jack held his ground. Suppose," said one of the lads. "We join company with you on the road and ride along to the place where you saw that fine company of fairies." "Done!" cried Jack. "But I will not promise that you will find them there, for I saw them scuttling up in the sky like a flight of bees and heard their wings."
Dootsy's back. Hi. Good morning. It's actually nighttime where we are. Sorry to interrupt your story. We're currently reading Fairies or No Fairies, a Irish folk tale about belief in fairies. Continue.
Heard their wings whizzing through the air. This, you know, was a bounce, for Jack had heard no such thing. Off rode the three and came to the demesne of old oak wood. They arrived at the wall flanking the field where stood the great oak, and the moon, by this time, having again emerged from the clouds, shone bright as when Jack had passed. "Look there!" he cried excitedly, for the same spectacle again caught his eyes, and he pointed to it with his horsewhip. "Look, and deny if you can." "Why," said one of the lads, pausing, "true it is that we do see a company of white creatures, but were they fairies 10 times over, I shall go among them." And he dismounted to climb over the wall. "Ah, Tom, Tom," cried Jack. "Stop, man, stop! What are you doing? The fairies, the good people, I mean, hate to be meddled with. You will be pinched and blinded, or your horse will cast its shoe. Or, look, a willful man will have his way. Oh, he's almost at the oak. God help him, for he is past the help of man." By the time Tom was under the tree and burst out laughing, "Jack," said he, "keep your prayers to yourself. Your fairies are not bad at all. Believe they will make tolerably good catsup."
Oh.
"Catsup," said Jack, who, when he found that the two lads, for the second, had followed his brother, were both laughing in the middle of the fairies, had dismounted and advanced slowly. "What do you mean, catsup?" "Nothing," replied Tom, "but that they are mushrooms, as indeed they were, and your Oberon is merely this overgrown puffball." Poor Mulligan gave a long whistle of amazement, staggered back to his horse without saying a word, and rode home in a hard gallop, never looking behind him. Many a long day was it before he ventured to face the laughters at Ballybulgholm, and to the day of his death, the people of the parish, and 5 parishes round, called him nothing but Mushroom Jack, such being their pronunciation of mushroom. I should be sorry if all my fairy stories ended up with so little dignity, but these are actors. As I foretold you, were all spirits, and are melted into air, into thin air.
Yeah?
It's kind of a dark story about the loss of faith in the folklore. Like this last line of the narrator, "I should be sorry if all my fairy stories ended with so little dignity, but these are actors, as I foretold you, were all spirits, and are melted into air, into thin air." And everything, it seems like this is the final story given after a full presentation of various stories. And then the final story in this section of the book is looks like more like a poem. "The Spell Struck," translated by T.W. Rolliston. "She walks as she were moving, some mystic dance to tread. She falls her gliding footstep, she leans her listening head. For once the fairy harping, she danced upon the hill, and through her brain and bosom the music pulses still. Her eyes were bright and tearless, but wide with yearning pain. She longs for nothing earthly, but oh, to hear again the sound that held her listening upon her moonlit path, the rippling fairy music that filled the lonely wrath. Her lips that once have tasted the fairy banquet's bliss shall glad no mortal lover with maiden smile or kiss. She's dead to all things living since that November eve, and when she dies in autumn, no living thing will grieve. Mm.
I think we'll actually go ahead and end it there. Just because I've finished my sketches and it's I figured we'd actually end at 9 instead of 10. Because my assistant has work in the morning and so do I. So again, thanks for all you guys who joined us, who wanted to just kind of hang out, see what we were doing for the Black Fae Day tag. And if you want to hear these stories and maybe make more sense of our late night imbibed gibberings, the videos on demand are going to be on YouTube. And yeah, I had a fun time doing this. Maybe I'll do this again for something.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll see you guys next time. Have a good night and a weird day.